So this is official. Welcome to the Project A event series. And we're a small nonprofit, but we're known throughout the world. So Project A stands for Aesthetics of Western Esotericism. But really, in short, it's a way to have an awe moment with the works of art, with the history, with things that should move us and inspire us as human beings. So welcome to the series where we do very different events set within the artist studio, the artist. And I hope that we are not the same when we leave after the next 45 minutes to an hour lecture, that somehow it touches our hearts and our souls and gives us something to think about. And I wanted to tell you, welcome David Brownstein. Thank you for joining today, and tell you just a quick backstory of how this happened. So David responded to one of my Project emails, and he said, I had just recently been to Eastern European trip and shot a little video, and I think you'll relate to it. And I kind of smiled to myself politely without answering him and put it in my emails to read. And 2-3 weeks later, somehow I remembered, I said, I should be a good person, I should check this out, just so I could say, oh, thanks for sending it, and that it would end there, right? And then I watched this short film, this music video, and it moved me to tears. It was like remembering my own past. And I said immediately, we have to do something together. I wrote back and I said, I don't know what it's going to be, but we have to create some kind of an event around this. And David said, I'm game, I'm traveling right now, but when I'm back. So he's back, he's ready for us. This is a story. The story, not just, yes, it's a Jewish story, and yes, it's David's story, and yes, it's ancestry story, but it's also much bigger. It's a story very small and personal, but very big in terms of asking who we are, and where do we come from, and how do we connect to it. Now I want you to think about your great-grandparents. Can anybody tell me their great-grandparents' names?
Well, there was Ida and Ida Abrams.
Let me make it a little bit harder. Great-grandparents. Can anybody name me their great-grandparents' names?
That's right.
Great-great?
Oh, great.
Now that was some 60 years ago, and we had already forgotten. And this is something that we share. They're right here on our skin and our DNA, and yet we can't know who they are and what they were like. This is what this project is about, searching for who we are as human beings. So one more thing I wanted to mention. I'm very honored with every single one of you being here, but I'm particularly excited about Pinchas Giller joining us today, who's the author of The Kabbalah, A Guide for the Perplexed. And I had sat in to his amazing Kabbalah seminars in American Jewish University, so I'm just really honored for him joining us today. And with that, welcoming David to transport us. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Zhenya, for having me and giving me the opportunity to present this video I call What to Say to a Ghost. I think I'm going to I'd originally planned an 8-hour presentation, but since we only have 1 hour, I think we're going to watch the video first and then we'll talk about it more. You all know a little bit about it. I want you to have your own experience, and then we'll take it from there. So I guess before I went to Lithuania and Belarus and did sort of my Jewish roots tour, people would say, why are you going? And I'd say, I don't know, I just want to walk down the street and see what it feels like. And this video is part of that process of figuring what that means. And I'm writing the song, which I wrote and sang and recorded in Barcelona last year, and making the video. It was still this process of going, what was it like? What did it feel like walking down the streets? How do I still feel now? It's still an unfolding process. So let's go to the videotape.
Ghost when he speaks in a language to a stone. When all that's left are the words obscured by moss, what to say to the stone when it tries to explain the years of loss? Say hello to a stone. The only proof of a life in a nearby home, making friends with a stone. Rays of light shining through after years alone. Clouds, clouds and tombstones are all that remain of my ancestors' homes. Clouds, clouds and dirty stones are the only signs of my family's home. The sky was gray that day when the soldiers came, took my family away. I was hiding under the bed. I could not hear what they said. I was left there all alone, and a neighbor came, hid me in her home. I was dreaming of a place far away. Take a walk with a ghost to a beach where his children all ran free. Have a talk with a ghost in the land he would never live to see. Make a deal with a ghost that you'll move on from the things you did not see. Try to heal with a ghost. Live the life that he did not live to see. Clouds, clouds and tombstones are all that remain of my ancestors' home. Clouds, clouds and dirty stones are the only signs of my family's home. Say hello to a ghost. 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 Say hello to a ghost.
Thank you. Growing up, we see our ancestors looking like this. Old faded sepia images, right? This was actually a Vilnius or Vilna. I found this online. Maybe I shot it in a museum there. But this is what we grew up. When I was flying into Vilnius, this is looking out the window flying to Vilnius, something looked weird to me, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But when I got to outside the airport, I realized that Vilnius was actually in color, that it wasn't sepia, that this is the present and this is now. I just expected whenever I thought about going to the old country, that it was going to be in sepia. Suddenly it was real. Suddenly it was in living color. This is the hotel we stayed in. Interestingly, so my grandfather was born in Vilnius about 1900, left there 1905-ish. So I was always looking at old buildings and going, if this was built in 1896, then my grandfather could have walked by this building. So that was kind of my threshold of like, could my grandfather at 5 have walked by this building? So I was happy that our hotel was built in 1895. And you know, usually on the top there's the date on these things. This is church across the street, proving that it was in color. Let's see. I spent 5 days in Vilnius and then 3 days in Minsk. I realized I jumped really into it because I didn't want to start talking about the data, because actually, for me, watching this today with a crowd of my people was great and sort of moving for me as well. So I didn't want to jump into the DNA heady stuff. But the journey for me started, I had my DNA done. I was 94% Askenazi. I knew that I was Jewish. I knew my family was from Lithuania, Belarus, Romania, and Ukraine, or as my grandmother called it, Russia. I knew that I was from there, but the fact that I was 94% Askenazi said to me that we'd been in the neighborhood a really long time. And so I kind of was wondering, what was it going to feel like to be there? Would there be any kind of DNA spark of something or other? And so seeing, you know, this modern, updated stuff, this was 5 of the people. I was traveling with about 15 people. I was traveling all around Europe by myself mostly, but I realized that going to Vilnius and Minsk was going to be, a little tricky. So there was a woman out of Atlanta who was doing Jewish Roots tours. So we were on our way to somewhere, but I realized when I saw my tour mates that we were the only Jews in town, basically. This is where everyone's from, but we were the American Jews doing this trip back. One of the first stops they took us to was sort of the House of Records, and we saw all these amazing old books. These were legal documents. If a house was bought or sold or someone was married or divorced, anything that happened was a record. So these become the source of all these things. Yeah. They took us to they had a bunch of things laid out and for us to see, including these images I'm showing you right now. These were, you could move these wheels, right? This was paper on top of paper. This hand could move out. So they had these old documents they showed us. You can see how the wheel would spin. They were showing all these amazing things. This was a street, Zaidu Street, which is Jewish street in Vilnius. It's now got cafes and stuff like that, but it was the center of the Jewish neighborhood, and during World War II, it was the center of the Jewish ghetto. I saw this from the outside, and actually I realized from the outside that it was a record shop, and I went in, there was like Frank Zappa and Jimi Hendrix, and I went, okay, this is the old country, but meets the new country, and this was an image that that was in the video. They call this building the library. There are photographs that were found in this area. Basically, this was also the center of the Jewish ghetto during World War II, the Nazi occupation. And they put photographs that they'd found in the neighborhood of the residents of this neighborhood. I particularly like this one because there was a guy playing guitar. And this was a list of residents of the Jewish, the Vilna ghetto in 1942. And this is just a building I loved but didn't know what it was. We got a tour from this woman, I forget her name. She reminded me so much of my grandmother. She talked like my grandmother. She smelled like my grandmother. She was a child during World War II, somehow survived. So she gave us a tour of the Jewish ghetto area in Vilnius. She sang us this little song at the end.
Let me turn on the, turn on the volume.
Till we are here, the memory of our history was a big Jewish community which Jerusalem obviously will be here.
Just wanted to give you a flavor of what of her. This was the gate at the Vilnius ghetto. If people were not in the gate during World War II, they were executed or arrested. I was taking this picture of this thing, and as I was walking by, these kids came by. And it was such a strange, creepy image of this blonde-haired kid looking strangely at me as I was taking a picture of the ghetto gate. Yeah. Just a map of the ghetto. I wanted to get to Belarus, where a lot of the story takes place. So I took a train in. These were my first images, just looking out the window from the train of the foreignness of Belarus. Also just from the train window. Train station at Minsk. You see the new shiny stuff, you see the older stuff. So this was Katya on the left and Ilya, our driver. Katya was incredible, educated, knew Russian, Belarus, English, many other languages, I believe. Knew Russian history, Jewish history, World War II history, World War I history. She knew so much, it was amazing. Because I had a smartphone and a SIM card, she would tell me stuff, and then I'd wonder about it, and I would be Googling something that she said, and go, wait a minute, what about that? And she just knew everything. And she was an incredible translator. She was also a photographer, and we spent a lot of time just, I guess many of her clients wanted to stay in the car and see stuff, but every once in a while I'd say, let's just get out and walk. And so I'd be taking pictures and she'd be taking pictures, so it allowed a different kind of experience. And Ilya didn't speak that much English. I just imagined that he had a gun. So I felt very safe. He was very friendly. She took me right away to the center of Minsk. That's a picture of statue of Stalin. It sort of gives you the ominousness of Soviet architecture, as they call it. Underneath this building, there's a shopping mall underneath here.
What's that?
There's a shopping mall underneath. Not a very fancy one, but that's what's underneath the surface in downtown center of Minsk. She took me to the this temple, this is what it looked like early on, and this is what it looks like now.
Can I just say,
Yeah.
it's said in the front, it actually says, I think it says Cultura and Kino. I think it was turned into a cinema. That's
Oh.
the advertisement in the front.
Ah.
So it's not a temple at that moment.
Oh, okay, right. Oh, thank you. Okay, great.
Unbelievable. It says Cultura.
Ah.
Culture.
Cultura. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I don't know where I took that picture, but we couldn't go in here. Maybe it was at the Minsk, the Jewish Museum that she took me to. I want to keep moving because I want to get to tell the stories of some of the people. That's right. So I'm taking photographs inside of the little museum there. This was a matzah maker. You can't really see it, but You know all the little holes in the matzah? There's like a wheel here that makes them. I can show you this image somehow later, but we had a lot of ground to cover, and then I was just picture, figure it out later. But I love that matzah maker. This was a park in Minsk where one day 500 Jews were killed, and this is a sculpture, one of the sculptures commemorating this event. This was interesting to me because my grandmother had almost the same design, same style design that I'd seen around that my mom had, but I didn't know where it was. It's the only time I've ever seen this again. I don't know the history of it really, but I want to get further in here since we're not doing the 8-hour version today. What was interesting, it was raining a lot, and it would rain and then it'd be sunny. It would rain and it would be sunny. And the clouds were amazing. And living in California, we don't see that many clouds. We don't see the rain clouds. We don't see that kind of stuff in the sky. Maybe I saw it more in New York, but I was really struck by the clouds. And as most of the buildings were gone, I realized that my grandmother, who was here till she was 5, that was one thing. My grandmother could have seen the same clouds. There was no buildings that were the same, but she could have been standing there and would have seen the same vista, and that was sort of my connection to one shared experience that she would have had. So Katya took me to this cemetery. Again, the clouds were intense. This was the grave of a well-known Jewish rabbi. It's not that well maintained, and people vandalize it. Kind of continued this like stones, and we leave stones on the top of graves, and you know, stones are the things they couldn't burn, they couldn't destroy. Although many people did their best. So that's a shot of Katya walking. As we're driving back to Minsk, there were a lot of these unfinished buildings that were just half built, kind of like this, just sitting there for years. Sort of a real estate scam, sounds like to me. But these were happening here. Just one little image of that. This was a building across from my hotel, the Minsk hotel where I was staying. I don't really know what it was, but I loved its crazy architecture there. This is the town of Lipnica, where my grandmother was born. I had a wealthy uncle who 15 or 20 years ago hired someone to go back and do all this research. We discovered that this was the town that he was from. And so we spent a lot of time.
Is it Ukrainian or what language is that?
This was Belarus.
Yes.
This is
Belarusian.
Belarusian.
Because I could read it, but it's not. It had a couple of letters. The E's would have been different.
I want to just get to. So this is during one of the times when Katya and I were just walking through town, and just everything just seems new and fresh and interesting and fascinating to me because it's now, and it's also it's old, and it's also after the Soviet architecture in the middle of Minsk. To see all the poverty and things was kind of interesting. So what happened a lot was we were walking around, and people would say in Belarusian, "Hey, what are you guys doing out there?" And Katya would say, "Oh, he's from America, his family's from here." And usually they'd go, "Oh, okay," and we'd walk on. This lady was interested in talking. And I could see that, so I'm here, Katya's here, she's talking to her, and so I would speak in English, Katya would translate, it comes back and forth. I could see that she was talkative, and I started asking Katya questions to ask her. So I said, "Hey, what are you doing today?" she said, oh, I'm gardening. And I went, well, what my mom would say is like, well, what are you gardening? What's in your garden? And so she said, well, why don't you come in? You can take a look. So I followed her back behind the gate, and she starts to show us her massive garden. And this is her, this is her little garden that she's working. And her flowers, and it was, again, the sky is beautiful. Suddenly I'm seeing all these bright, beautiful colors in this massive farm, and I go, who else works with you here? You do this whole thing by yourself? And she goes, no, I have help. I have this lady helping me. So this is how I saw her first. And she was out working the field, and we walked in, and this woman is completely deaf, and the woman was yelling in her ear in Belarusian, he's from America. She was literally walking up to her ear. But she was out there working the fields, and that's where this image came from, and which when I spoke to Xenia about the talk, showed her this. And so even though she's not in the video, I really wanted to tell you her story. Excuse me?
She's like a walking painting.
She's a walking painting, yeah, yeah. When I was taking that picture, I was going, I can't believe this just happened. So also, Katya would find out before we went to a town, were there any Jews there or anybody that knew the Jews? This woman was not Jewish, but she remembered that there were Jews, and she said they were very nice. And I asked her if I could take her picture after I'd taken a few, and she said, well, why don't you come be in the picture with me? So we took this little picture together. And then she showed me her garden. I just was loving these portraits of this incredible woman. Again, Katya was translating in these conversations. More clouds and driving. I'm sorry if I'm speeding through. It was just amazing to take in the age in a way. So this was all shot on my iPhone. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah, the iPhone. I used to shoot 35 millimeter, but now my iPhone's in my pocket, and the iPhone has a mind of its own. I go, well, I wonder what the iPhone's going to say about this, and I find what the composition is going to be, and what the colors are going to be, and what's it going to do, what's going to look good on the phone, and I just go with that. It's great. I love it. So this was the woman. Well, the woman sitting next to the older woman who was the town clerk, basically agreed to take us to this cemetery. And as we got in the car and drove together, she said, I have to apologize. We haven't had the money to really take care of this cemetery. So I apologize. We're really sorry. I went, okay, okay. So we drove to the edge of town and just got out of the car, and I didn't see anything. I just saw woods on the other side. And we walked about 20 or 30 yards in from the road and came across this. And the more we walked around, the more I saw that there were gravestones in this area. Yeah. So it was clear to me that no one had been here in a really long time. And I just started taking pictures of every headstone I could see and started scraping off the moss when I could, and wanted to just take pictures of these on the theory that someday somebody would help me figure out who they were, or what year. Yeah, Pinkhouse was telling me.
His name was Yosef Yosafat. That's as far as I've gotten.
I have a lot of these. We're not going to look at them all today, but again, it's funny. In this tour experience, we had about 20 minutes. I'm sort of taking it in and just snap, 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 snap. Take it now, figure it out later. It was just the most surreal abandoned graveyard I've ever seen. And so there's just this little round one, almost like a wheel. But it was amazing that the sun was streaming through. It felt like it was just my moment to be there and experience this thing. And it was a moment of incredible beauty and sadness. This was just a little pond just further out. I was happy to cleanse my visual palette with something else. More of the clouds that we see in the video. I want to get ahead. So in the center of the video where we see, this is on the way to meet Boris, just shooting out the car window. So this is Boris. The center, I told his story in the middle of the song when it goes, the sky was gray that day when the soldiers came and took my family away. This was his story before World War II. He was raised by a neighbor when he was 5. She told him all of her life, the neighbor said, "You're not Jewish, you're not Jewish, you're not Jewish," because she wanted him to live. When he was elected senior class president when he was in high school, and when they said, he asked them, "Why did you elect me?" They go, "Well, you're Jewish, we figured you'd be good at this." So Katya found him and said he was going to take us to visit the cemeteries, because that's kind of what we do in these places. We visit the cemeteries, because that's all that's pretty much intact, to the degree that it's intact. So we were at this we met at this little museum for the town, and this blonde woman in the center named Lisa was interning there for her first day, but she decided she wanted to come with us to the cemeteries, and because her grandmother was buried there. And I said, "Was your grandmother Jewish?" She said, I think so, I'm not really sure. So suddenly we're having a caravan. We're all just going out to the cemetery together. Of course, the turrets outside of the museum. So the first, Boris showed us, this had been a cemetery which they moved to another site because they needed to put in a hockey rink here. And he remembered the days when they were moving all the graves from this point to the other point. Also, because I was hungry and we had a full day, I said, on the way, let's go get some lunch. So I had lunch with Katya and Lisa and Ilya, and it was a surreal and beautiful lunch with these guys. Luckily, Katya was great at translating, so that I felt like I had a conversation with them. And so we get to the cemetery. We're sort of looking for two things. One is we were looking for Boris's mother, and Lisa was looking for her grandmother. Also, I had been discovering that not that I discovered, I hadn't really thought these things through, like who's your grandmother, who was my great-grandmother, what was my grandmother's maiden name. I realized her maiden name was Gorelick, although I always knew her by her married name. So Katya was finding all these Gorelicks that I'd never really thought was my family in this cemetery. I can't remember which ones were there. She goes, "Oh, there's a Gorelick, and there's a Gorelick, and there's a Gorelick." And so I was always looking at the years again to try to figure out, well, could they be related? And they also had these sort of surreal imagery of the photographic things. And so again, it's like looking at the years. My grandmother was there from 1895-ish to 1900. Was there going to be a connection? That was it's kind of figuring out the dates, figuring out the connection. So they have these strange little gates around everything. And so this was Boris's mother's grave. And as you know, he had told me the whole story about how she raised him. I mean, not his actual mother, his adopted mother. Well, yeah, we'll get to her now, I guess. Later on, I've got an image of the house that Boris was actually raised in. So this woman was also in the same town. She was amazing. She was friendly and warm and just a sweetheart. She was the German teacher. She said she had taught half the town German. She also reminded me of my grandmother's also, and this was just this beautiful day with all these people there. And I loved what she's wearing and how it fits with the couch and, you know, her shoes. It was just surreal and incredible. Boris telling some of the story. This image is in the video. At some point, I forgot the woman's name, but she invites us to the kitchen. Would you like to have some compote, which was sort of fruit with water, and these biscuits that were sort of stale and reminded me also of my grandmother. At one point, after she'd served us compote once, she said, would you like some more? And Katya said, well, we have to get going. And I said, yeah, I'll have some more. And she kept saying, have some more, have some more. And I said, she's a Jewish mother. She's not going to make us stop. She's not going to stop. And even though she didn't really speak English, she tapped my knee and she understood when I said Jewish mother. So I had this great recognition of the, that stuff. Here's a picture of me and the Jewish mother. She showed me this. This was a German man who had come to the town. Essentially, he was trying to just make a reparations and say, as a German, we apologize for what happened. And they gave her this little flashlight. I don't know what's inscribed into it, but he was literally just coming around to apologize. I didn't know that had ever been happening. So she showed me that photograph and the little lighter.
To my loved ones, my
Okay. What language is it?
Oh, wait, they're in the thing?
In here?
In here, yeah.
Yeah.
We любим, we love. We любим город. And then the last one.
Is it Russian?
We love somebody, we love
That's great.
testimony to love.
Oh, cool. Thank you. This was actually the house that Boris was then raised in.
I just figured it out. We любим вас, we love you. That's what it says.
Ah.
We love you.
We love you. That's great. Thank you. This was the house that Boris was raised in. So after the whole visit, we were returning Boris to his home, and he showed us this is where he grew up after he was adopted. This was his neighbor's house right next door. Boris, yeah, this is the front door of that guy's house. I don't know what to say about it other than like, oh my God. And then Boris wanted to take us to his house. Boris had this still inside his house that he was making this wine of these red berries.
Samagonka.
What?
Samagonka.
Samagonka?
You can, like a home-baked wine, but samagonka.
You know, he insisted that I and Katya and Ilya all take a bottle. He gave us all a bottle to take home. And it tasted like Manischewitz. Exactly like Manischewitz. It was sort of strange. So he had this incredible still, homemade still. And this is his inside of his house. And this is him, yeah, we're saying goodbye, but you can see Ilya's got a bottle of his wine in a Coke bottle. And I took mine home to my hotel and had a little sip and didn't want to travel back to Vilnius with it. So in the song, I haven't really talked about the song and the story part of it in a way, but as I was seeing all these towns and seeing all these gravestones, I was realizing that there was a human there, and I was having this kind of dialogue with this ghost, or thinking about what would I say to this ghost, right? If we were having a dialogue, and then I realized well, this ghost spoke another language. So the line, what to say to a ghost if he speaks in a language of not my own, I realized that we didn't communicate in the same language, but I started still having this meditation about what does it mean, what would I say, what could I say, what do they need to say to me, and with sort of mythical relative that's been missing, that's lost. And as I got to the end of the song, after the whole Boris story, I went, well, let me show you New York. That's where we went. That's where my parents grew up. My parents were born in Brooklyn. My grandparents came to Ellis Island. They settled in New York. So in my mind, it was, let me show you New York. Let me show you, here's Manhattan. Here's Brooklyn. This was my family as they grew up. My grandmother and grandfather in the top right, the two in the right, top right. This was the patriarch who came over. I don't remember his name. It was Zalman. I've got it somewhere, but he was probably the one that decided to take the family over and had the means somehow. This was also a family photograph from 1920. My family started they called it a cousins club because they're basically 5 cousins in the early days started an organization that were descendants of the Zevin family. So we were calling them the Zevin descendants. And every year we'd have a meeting or have a dinner of all my relatives. And this was one of the early ones. And I later realized that part of the reason they needed to do that was they needed to incorporate so that they could get a family cemetery plot. And so these dinners continued. This is 1937, the 11th annual dinner of the Zevin descendants at the Broadway Central Hotel. This actually is my parents in the center there. Mom and Dad in Brooklyn. And actually, yeah, that's my grandmother who was born in Ukraine. And towards the end of my mom's life, we went to Brooklyn. We went visiting the family cemetery, and she said, "Oh, let's go by my old house." And I'd heard about this apartment building where she grew up, and the whole family lived, but it was amazing for me to see the family building. And this was the family plot that they had. It's the Zevin descendants, where all my family on that side has been buried. And it was interesting, after seeing all the random cemeteries back in the old countries, to see the more organized, formal sort of stuff here. And somehow in the process of making this video, I was going through all these old family photographs, and I found these two that I save all these old photographs, which I believe this is an old picture of Ukraine. Not entirely sure, but at the end of the process of making this video, I found these, and this became the last image in the video. So I've raced through the slides in record time, and happy to answer questions, any things you want to talk about or wondering about. And
Can I ask one thing?
yeah,
Do you guys want to see the video one more time, kind of gone through the lecture and just take it in a different way? Okay, so we can.
great. Let's do that. That's great.
What to say to a ghost when he speaks in a language not my own? How to deal with a ghost? How to deal with a memory not my own? I'm alone with a ghost, all alone with the fear that's not my own. Make a deal with a ghost. Take him home, let him have a place of his own. Clouds and tombstones, stone. When all that's left are the words obscured by moss, what to say to the stone when it tries to explain the years of loss? Say hello to a stone. The only proof of a life in a nearby home, making friends with a stone. Rays of light shining through after years alone. Clouds, clouds and tombstones are all that remain of my ancestors' homes. Clouds, clouds and dirty stones are the only signs of my family's home. The sky was gray that day when the soldiers came, took my family away. I was hiding under the bed. I could not hear what they said. I was left there all alone, and a neighbor came, hid me in her home. I was dreaming of a place far away. Take a walk with a ghost to a beach where his children all ran free. Have a talk with a ghost in the land he would never live to see. Make a deal with a ghost that you'll move on from the things you did not see. Try to heal with a ghost. Live the life that he did not live to see. Clouds, clouds and tombstones are all that remain of my ancestors' home. Clouds, clouds and dirty stones are the only signs of my family's home. Say hello to a ghost. 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 Say hello to a ghost.
Thank you.
We'll take a few minutes to do a couple of few questions, and then we'll do a reception and you get a chance to talk to David.
Quick question.
Yeah, yeah.
A couple of days ago, I was reading about Mark Chagall, the artist, the famous artist, and I asked my husband 2 days ago, did you know that he was a Belarus man? And I wonder if they were talking about him in your tour, because he lived many, many years in Belarus.
We didn't get into that, but no, I'm aware of that. I think,
I thought he was a Frenchman in
Vitebsk, this little village of Vitebsk.
you know, I think the thing is that when the Soviet Union broke up, we started having a sense of all these countries being distinct, but back then it was just one big blob of Russia. So now we tend to kind of go, oh, I'm from Lithuania, I'm from Poland, we're from this, we're from that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a blur, but yeah, I'd love to know. Oh,
Just wanted to jump in.
please.
It's a family story because my great-grandparents knew him when he came through their house, and he was very poor and very hungry. So they fed him, and in order, he had no money to pay them, no way to thank them, and so he would bring little drawings or little paintings, and they said, Markich, ты хороший, you're a good boy, but please don't bring this junk in the house. So I would have had a Chagall. I have to tell you.
So they were in Belarus, your family was in
You knew
Belarus?
So I think it's when he either came through some part where they were staying, see, it's already foggy for me, but I
They
know
were
this
somewhere
was
there, somewhere.
that
yes.
was the family story, that we would have had a Chagall.
A few of those hand drawings, and you would have had more than the lottery.
You know what they did, because my uncle had figured out some places. Essentially, I gave her a list of places I thought I was from, and she did her best to figure out how to just touch base in these things. So it wasn't really as much of a cultural tour as much of a trying to hit the points where I knew people were from.
Well, I really enjoyed your documentary. It's
Oh,
incredible.
thank
It
you.
brings me to tears because I'm half Askenazi Jewish accent, only half. But my father's family are from Kiev, from the Ukraine.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very
And
much.
we just did the DNA, my kids and
Yeah.
all of us, and it's incredible.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah.
I hope you don't mind if I just get a little far afield, because when I was in 1967, I was on top of Cadbury in England, and I excavated archaeological site linked to King Arthur, and I realized that there were ghosts in the air. And later on in my life, when I worked on sacred graves in the Galilee, and I would go to hidden away places, and I was conscious of the presence. And then in Eastern Europe, you know, in the graveyards, but also the ravines where people were massacred in different places, I would have this sense of the palpability of ghosts. And obviously it's something that moved you also when you got in touch with the presence. So I don't know how we address this very subtle seeking of these moments of like spectral presence of others. And it can't happen in a large group or in an urban area. It can only happen in these really rural places like you went to, that you have this strong sense of presence of past, past souls. So I was wondering if you have to unpack, because I get what you're portraying, but what else do you have to say?
I mean, I don't personally have senses of spirits per se, although a lot of my friends do. For me, it was just trying to, a little bit more of an intellectual sense of what does it mean? What's the biggest sense I had was, this is where we're from, but we're not. Where's home? I'm not really sure. What's it like? It was like a vacuum. Yeah, the ghost for me is not an abstraction, but it was my attempt to maybe dramatize a relationship of one who wasn't here anymore, in a way. And what does it mean to me in my current DNA as a New Yorker, Los Angelino American, and as immigration has been happening, and that's our family, and immigration happens with many different ethnicities, and genocide is not a Jewish exclusive thing either. So a lot of my friends have said what you said. I had a more visceral sense of a ghost-like thing. For me, it was a little bit less visceral and more maybe just the abstraction. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure what that means out in a way. But that's a great question.
Dave,
Thank
when
you.
you showed the pictures of those books, even from the photograph, I felt for ghosts just from those pages, that documentation.
Yeah.
That gave me goosebumps, along with the cemetery that's in the spooky forest, where
Mhm.
you don't see it unless you kind of open the leaves. But that's that. What's that? There's a psychological term. We have a psychologist when it's that spooky moment. What's that called? That term? Uncanny. It was the uncanny. Where I even felt it in this room, like it spilled out of the bad projection, and here it was.
Yeah. It's
I
funny.
agree with that too. And when they talked about how they moved that cemetery for the ice rink, the reason you had mentioned how in Brooklyn your graveyards were so well organized. Well, that graveyard was well organized too before it was moved. And you can see the lack of care of throwing and breaking all these stones because they weren't of a shape. And so that eerie feeling I also felt where you actually documented the ghosts. You just don't realize it.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. How do you see document? Tell me more about that. Say more about that.
They feel in this room, like those people you want to hypothetically, intellectually ask the questions, or what would you tell them? I felt like it was our job also somehow to apologize, to somehow tell them it's okay, we care and we remember them, that they're not forgotten. I felt like they were here. I don't know if that's...
Yeah,
Isn't there an old Jewish notion that says that when you stop saying the name of those that have passed, that's when the soul elevates and moves on? So here's an opportunity to witness these names. You're a scholar. Is that true?
Yeah. It has for the years of Kaddish and the years of commemoration. That's all it's about.
When you stop saying the name?
When
Well, you say it to keep on, you
correct.
pray for the souls to keep on pushing it upward.
Yes.
And
yeah.
then to commemorate year after year, but after that it's on its own.
Right, that's what I understand from my dad's own passing, but then it made me think, like, are we now witnessing these souls and giving life once again to another incarnation?
Well,
of
he
souls?
pronounced one of the names.
Right, exactly right.
Right.
Exactly
So
right.
he furthered it with
Yes.
the mitzvah, and which went for the documentation of this cemetery, which no one has been to, I guarantee you, for many, many years. And so those people are all feeling unrest, rightly so. So you've given them a window out of that place. So that's a mitzvah for you too.
Also, the idea of reality, I always think about it as a painter, as an artist. Here we are, but nobody knows of our existence. Nobody's speaking about us. Nobody's loving us. We might as well be dead. And yet you could be dead, and if somebody resurrects you by the memory, by the love, by the wanting, that journey you took, they're more alive than some of the people who are alive. So that's the ghost quality as well, where the naming, the photographing, the documenting, the making the artwork, us witnessing it and giving back, it makes it palpable. It makes it physical. And that's very, I think that's very, it might be other cultures, but the Jewish culture, the idea of remembrance, holding on, making it real now.
I also think that what you just did, I call it organized stumbling, because you literally stumbled through the town and with no real knowledge of what you were going to find, and you ended up organizing it into a song and a group of visualizations, which attracted all of us to come hear it. So
Yeah,
you're
thank
now
you.
a master of organized stumbling.
Well, yeah, thank you. It's all the, when I was in these places, imagine Katya was a great tour guide, but also she's like, we got to go to the next place, we got to go to the next place. And so partly I wanted to just capture it. I was like, I'll shoot this now, I'll make sense out of it later. And part of it was in the making of the video, and part of it sharing it. I didn't really know what it meant, I just knew I had to shoot it now.
Have you shared it with the folks back where you were yet?
I sent it to Katya, and she really liked it. She really liked it, and I gave her a really great TripAdvisor.
Do they
review
have a
also.
little museum still there?
Excuse me?
Do they have a little museum still there?
There are some museums that,
A Jewish museum, I mean.
Yeah. I mean, not so much in Belarus that I saw. There was a Vilnius library that was the Jewish library. It was started by a non-Jewish man who had grown up in Vilnius. I asked him why he wanted to start this thing, not being Jewish. He said, well, they would take him to the pits, but they never told them that it was Jews that were mostly killed. They would just say it was. They were sort of vague about who it was. And he said he realized he wasn't aware, having grown up in Vilnius, of the genocide that had happened, but he felt like he wanted to keep that alive. He wanted to have this library of Jewish history and Jewish culture. He said he really wants to start Yiddish theater there now. He's not a Jewish man, but he wanted to start Yiddish theater there as a way to commemorate the culture. My dad had written a book after he retired from IBM. He wrote a book about the origins of Christianity and how it sort of took over from Judaism. My dad was an IBMer, so it was kind of a marketing approach in his mind. But he wrote this book, which I then presented to the library in Vilnius also.
What about synagogues? Are there any synagogues that, I know there are not Jewish people living there, but the synagogue, have they kept at all?
There are some. I mean, we went, I didn't show much of it, but they took us to Saturday morning services in Vilnius, which I went to. Orthodox, the women had to be upstairs, the men all had toilets, and I asked the rabbi there about it. The rabbi there was from Minsk, actually. He was a young man. I asked him why he had come to Vilnius to be the rabbi, and he said it's been a sort of a troubled, difficult community, and I wanted to give it some help and give it some structure. There was a minyan. The Jewish community was growing. There was a Jewish center there. There are probably places. I mean, I would like to present this talk a lot. So I'm really open to your suggestions or feedback or places. It's just something I want to share. The experience of going there shifted my view of my understanding of my Jewish history, my Jewish background. Everyone I talked to about it, also, we grew up as American Jews not knowing a lot about that stuff, partly because, well, my grandmother didn't talk about it, but she was young when she left. And also they wanted to forget to some degree. So now we're trying to make sense out of it. We're trying to understand our piece of it.
Do you know if there's any initiative to digitize all of those books at all, if that's happened? Because this could be such an accelerator to that in the beginning of, it's so rich. I can't imagine that nobody's going to be digitizing any of that at this stage, especially there's a rich digital culture there on the tech side.
In Vilnius, is there? Yeah, it's. I mean, let's put it this way. I didn't hear anything about digitizing it. They did say to us, if in advance, if we knew, they would do research for us. So I have the card of the person that would do research. If you wanted to find out about your history, they would. If you could give them the dates and the names, they would go through that stuff and look through it. But I don't know what's happened digitally, actually.
It feels like there's a lot of potential to this now historically.
Yeah.
Even the books documenting these gravestones and trying to translate and remember the Book of Remembrance. I just feel that there is a lot of even way beyond opportunities.
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to invite everybody to come.
Let's just
join
do
us
one more question up
Yeah,
here.
last question.
Yeah, did you hear more of Boris's story? We've got a piece of it, but the night when they took his parents away, did you hear about his youth or anything to fill in,
You know, he grew up in that town, and his mother insisted that his adopted mother insisted he was not Jewish. He has kids.
Before that, I mean.
What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Does he
Before that,
remember?
does he remember, or?
I don't remember how much more he told me, frankly. I know he's got some kids. His kids want him to move to Israel. They're there. The hat that he was wearing was of a kibbutz in Israel. I asked him about that. So they say, why don't you come move to Israel, Dad? And he probably will, he says. But he doesn't seem to be in any rush either.
That's the moment that gives you chills in the video, when you, with those words, it's just, and at first we think that that's the author's, I mean, I assume that's your story.
Yeah, right.
And that's what I love, that this is our story, and that could be also, it doesn't have to be just the Jewish story, it's the humanity and what we do to each other, and that's where it becomes very big.
Well, yeah, in my thinking about what's this relationship I'm having, this conversation I'm having with this ghost or with these headstones or with this place, as I heard Boris's story, it became really real. Yeah. And I wanted in the song, just he had told me this personal story. I never met anybody with this personal story. I'd been to his house, I'd drank his weird Manischewitz-like wine. I wanted to just put him in the song and give it a face and give it a real experience of of genocide and knocking on the door and you walk out the door and never come back.
And from a kid's point of view, that's the part that's really chilling.
Mm.
It's not even us, it's a kid telling it.
I think the most important part of what you're doing is telling the story.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of what you're doing. You know, my son was studying in Berlin, and we are from the composer family of Mendelssohn, right? And so he goes to Leipzig, where some of our family was from, and he looks at the Mendelssohn Museum. And he goes through the records, and he comes back home and he says to me, you know, Dad, I couldn't find our family in the records of the Mendelssohns. I don't think we're really part of that family. And I said, okay, Max, were any of the Mendelssohns sent to concentration camps? I said, do they have that in the records? And he said, no, there were no Mendelssohns sent to concentration camp. I said, so in the museum, they have the history all the way up to the concentration camps. But then I sent him to Dachau in Munich, and there is Mendelssohn in the concentration camp. They kept those records very well. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interesting how societies give you information, but they don't tell you the whole story because of nationalistic influences.
Yeah,
Well, as we were walking through Belarus, an ongoing gag or Katya and I were having was she would translate anything I wanted to. I go, what does that sign say? And she'd say, oh, it says historical building, do not deface.
And it was all defaced?
Well, no, it was basically saying, this was important. We're not going to tell you what it was. We're not going to, because they tried to erase any kind of religion.
Oh.
We're not going to tell you what it was. We're just going to say it's historical. Don't destroy it under penalty of law. And there were buildings that obviously were religious buildings at one point. And I go, what does that one say? Religious, you know, a historical building, do not destroy under penalty of law.
Yeah. Were you there when they were doing the excavations in Vilnius?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Synagogue, and
I've seen that it's advanced. When I was there, they found the mikveh, and we saw bags of dirt in the area. So they were starting to do that when I was there. I've seen some photographs just recently that were much more advanced in the process.